Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Cup Chat with Birding with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service. I'm Emily, and joining me today, again, Dr. Frank. We all know everybody. And we have a special guest today, Raymond, and I am famous on Cup Chat for butchering names, words, anything of that nature. So I will let you introduce yourself and say your last name so I don't butcher it. And then we're going to let you introduce yourself a little bit, and we're talking about woodpeckers today. So
cool.
We'll tell us a little bit about yourself and your background as a birder.
Sure. So my name's Raymond. Last name is VanBuskirk, like a van, a bus, and Captain Kirk.
I could have maybe gotten that with the explanation.
I almost wanted to try because in high school I had a friend that was her last name, and so I kind of I was like, I'm guessing it's the same, but Emily's very nervous about the situation, so maybe it's different.
Right. I think technically it's VanBuskirk, but VanBuskirk, it's been Americanized. So yeah, I've been a birder pretty much as long as I can remember. I grew up in New Mexico and discovered birds while camping when I was 7 years old. Western tanager flew down and landed next to me on this log. And I just, was like captivated and kind of just followed that passion throughout my life. And it led me into some field research, and I just simply enjoyed going out and observing birds. And the more I did that, the more I learned about it and wanted to sort of share that with people. And so I got into tour leading, bird guiding. I own a birding tour company, Brant Nature Tours, and tour leader for Wings. And, so I just my whole life has just been birds and birding and kind of sharing that with people. So I'm delighted to be here talking about woodpeckers.
I wear my woodpecker shirt. Love. Oh my goodness. So you fit in the crew. I don't know so Raymond, you were highly recommended by Bill Sane. I don't know, did you know that?
Okay, I heard. Yeah.
And so Bill is one of our beloved friends, and he would so appreciate you joining in with a full-fledged even with your birding t-shirt on. So love it. So today we're talking about woodpeckers. And we're going to go into the ID, kind of like we did ducks the other day, everybody, with Raymond today. So as we dive, I guess that's kind of better a duck terminology. I don't have a good pun for as we peck our way into bird ID. So kind of give us the general clues about woodpeckers being woodpeckers. If we see a bird in a tree or flying, how do we know that it's a woodpecker?
Okay. So if I, sort of think about when I'm walking up, through the woods or whatever, and I see a woodpecker in a tree, one of the first things I notice is where the bird is perched. You think about some songbirds and things, they often will perch in kind of the outer limbs of a tree, maybe. But woodpeckers in particular tend to perch on more prominent branches. Oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes with more of a vertical stance, right? They're up against a trunk.
Well, hold on, we've got to pause, Raymond, because that is Maureen's favorite thing. I know I didn't tell you on the email. This is Maureen's one of her favorite things to talk about. So let's talk really quick about Maureen, you want to talk about how they hang on to the trunk vertically?
Yes, with their super cool zygodactylus feet, which zygodactylus is one of my favorite words. And so it basically means that where most of our, like that, Raymond's got it. It's like most perching birds have the 3 little toes that wrap around, and the 4th because they're meant to sit on a branch. So that doesn't work well, but the toes just wrap around like this. Whereas zygodactylus, totally just like Raymond showed, they've got 2 going up and 2 going down. So that arrangement, all birds have those 4 toes, but that arrangement is different on different birds. And so on a woodpecker, it lets them be like a kickstand. So they've got 2 to hold on to the top and 2 to kickstand off the bottom. Thank you, Emily.
You're welcome. I knew that was going to be one of your favorite things today. I wasn't going to let Raymond steal it from you. I knew.
Good call. I was planning to steal it too.
What?
I said good call because I was planning to steal it too.
Ah,
And woodpeckers, they take it.
Sundays.
They take it a step further too, because as they're clinging to the tree branches, if you think about them sort of hanging on, they've got, these kind of big heads and these long, straight, kind of tapering, sharply pointed bills, and they're going to hammer into a tree. They also have to get some extra leverage so they don't fall off the tree backwards. So they have tails that they use to sort of push up against a tree branch, and that are quite stiff, and they give them sort of some extra leverage. Little woodpecker tripod mount there on the tree.
Oh, that's a good way to think about it. Raymond, I don't know if you watched our other any of our other Cub Chats, but Maureen, do you remember the guy who did the research about woodpeckers and tied the ladder to the tree?
Oh yeah. Goodness, what was his name? Yeah, actually, and it was about a year ago because I met him at the Wildlife Society annual conference, and he actually, Raymond, to get up in the trees, he didn't even, sometimes the ladder was tied to the tree and sometimes it was
They
like,
were old, they were burned forest, so he couldn't
guy
put the ladder on
wires,
the
yeah.
tree.
They couldn't
Sure.
lean it because it was all like,
Right, tree
standing
fall down.
dead timber. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
It's pretty intense.
So wait, so how did they use the ladder?
So they used guy wires, like when you think of like a radio tower and there's just got the 4 wires, and so it's just like it's up and there's tension keeping it there and it works, but they were like, it's pretty, you just got to trust the physics that it's not gonna fall
just
over.
trust it.
And that's how he was inspecting woodpecker nests, right? Yeah. Anyway, so I don't know. I guess the leverage of the tail and kind of made me think of the ladder.
Totally. So that gives woodpeckers oftentimes a very upright position in a tree, often against, a vertical limb. I always tell people everything's the case except for when it isn't. Obviously, woodpeckers will sometimes use horizontal limbs. Occasionally, will crawl up to sort of the outer portions of the tree, maybe to broadcast a call, or look before they decide to fly somewhere, but usually more in the innards of the tree on a prominent limb.
Yeah, a couple of months ago we were doing a bird survey and there was a woodpecker on the top of a tree, and you just normally don't see them there, but my Liz, my program mate, and I were both looking at it like, what is that, what is it? And the light wasn't great, and then finally we got it and we were like, that's a woodpecker, but that's not the first thing you think of perched at the top of a tree.
Yep. Yeah. So, and then they tend to, overall, they look as a group pretty short-tailed to me. Long to medium length wings, but sort of short tails. Generally largish looking heads. And like I said before, a long, straight tapering bill that comes to a sharp point. So, that is kind of, it's a unique shape amongst the bird world. And so, one of the first things I look for is just kind of like that shape, that style of movement or positioning in the tree. Another thing that I'll look for is they have actually a very distinctive style of flying. If you think about, most birds flying, you've got flapping, and then you have like passive gliding, right? And some birds, especially small songbirds, warblers, sparrows, things like that, those little gliding portions are really short. And so they have really bouncy, kind of chaotic flight because they're just flapping constantly. With woodpeckers, they have some pretty powerful flaps, which gives them their lift. And then they have a gliding period that's a little longer and they sort of fall. And so they have this undulating flight that, woodpeckers coming across. This is a very distinctive just flight pattern to watch for. And most of the woodpeckers fly that way.
Wait, most of, which ones don't?
Lewis's woodpeckers have a pretty flat style of flying, less undulation. Even pileated woodpecker, they tend not to have as deep of an undulating flight as some of the smaller woodpeckers do. But overall, that style of flying, I think, is, if you watch for it in the field, it's a quick way to say, oh, I've got myself a woodpecker here. Now let me take it a step further.
Right. So I love that we've kind of talked about location, or surroundings and habitat. We talked about, them being on that vertical portion of the tree. If you're seeing them, if you're seeing, and to me, it's more of a context clue of probably what's not a woodpecker,
Sure.
In terms of me being out birding, if they're hanging out on the outsides of the tree, maybe we kind of default to, oh, this is probably not a woodpecker, unless we have other
Right.
context clues that kind of get us there. And then I think you did a good job of describing the shape. And I think of the shape categories, we look through our making the case for ID kind of points. They're very uniquely shaped compared to all other groups.
Pretty
Don't
much,
you
yeah.
agree? You know?
They do look actually superficially similar to nuthatches, which are in fact not a woodpecker, but fill a similar ecological niche. So they're shaped like them because they peck on trees in kind of the same way. But if you see, they have a different also style of sort of holding themselves on the tree. If you see a woodpecker head down, crawling down a tree, it's a nuthatch. If it's, going up a tree, maybe it's a woodpecker. But
So would
overall,
a woodpecker ever crawl down a tree?
no.
No. So that's key difference there for nuthatches and woodpeckers.
Yeah. So if it's going up a tree, doesn't necessarily mean it's not a nuthatch, because they can go up trees. But if it's facing down, looks like a woodpecker crawling down a tree head first, it's a nuthatch.
Okay, but now also let's talk a little bit about, so nuthatches are not woodpeckers, but let's talk about some things that are woodpeckers, but their name doesn't say woodpecker. So can you talk a little bit about sapsuckers and also flickers, which are one of my favorite, just because that's one that we would get in our backyard when I was growing up.
Totally. Yeah, so I just actually talked to someone on an airplane the other day about sapsuckers, and she was like, I have this bird.
Random person, Raymond?
What?
A random person on an airplane?
Completely random person on an airplane.
Did she end up being a bird?
She is sort of interested in birds. She watches birds around her home in Louisville, but, is not really a birder per se. She saw me looking at a field guide and just asked me some questions about this bird that was drilling this like very unique, very geometric pattern of holes in her tree. And she was like, it acts like a woodpecker, but I'm not sure if it is. I think it might be a sapsucker. And I was like, oh, turns out sapsucker is a type of woodpecker. And a flicker is also a type of woodpecker. Oh, I got to pause. Are you guys still with me?
I'm still with you. Emily might be frozen.
No, Emily.
Okay, you're good. Carry on.
Okay, so sapsuckers, flickers, both types of woodpeckers. But the way that they utilize tree, is a little different. Sapsuckers, they drill into various parts of the tree to allow sap to kind of pour out of the tree. They call them sap wells, and they sort of actively manage a number of sap wells within their territory. And they do, in fact, suck the sap. They eat some of the sap, high energy source. And it also has been known to attract other small insects and things that want to eat the sap, and they'll eat those insects as protein source. And it provides a really valuable resource for a number of other birds as well that wouldn't be able to, get into the tree because they don't have a bill made for drilling into wood. So sapsuckers are woodpeckers. Flickers, also very large woodpeckers with really strong, long, sharp bills. They look like a woodpecker. We call them flickers, and I've heard a number of reasons why we call them flickers, why people think they're called flickers. I believe sort of the truest reason is because of a noise that they make. They go flicker, 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 flicker. And that sort of sound is just, how they got their name. But I've also heard people say when a flicker flies away, you get a flicker of color in the wing, which is sort of unique amongst them. The northern flicker is found in The forests of eastern North America show a bright yellow or sort of golden flash in the wings. The northern flickers across the western part of the continent tend to show sort of an orangey or a reddish flash in the wings. And then there is a sort of distinct species of flicker found in the saguaro forest of the Sonoran Desert that also has kind of a golden flash. But yeah, so all of those are in fact woodpeckers.
So I think that's really neat. And so this one thing that talking about the sapsucker made me think of is there's, different woodpeckers. Woodpeckers are drilling into trees and they're seeking bugs, but there's different ways that some of them are going to do that. And so like you're saying, another identification thing of sometimes you don't see the bird, but you know that it's there because of those little holes on the tree. Talk a little bit about acorn woodpeckers, if you would.
Oh, sure. Yeah, acorn woodpeckers, they're really just wildly looking species of woodpecker. Actually, maybe I pull up.
They look like little clowns. They're so cute.
They totally do. Let's see. Maybe this will work.
Oh,
Yep,
yeah,
that
that's
works.
perfect.
Like I would
There we
have a
go.
hard
So-
time taking it seriously if it was talking to me because its eyes look so surprised and it just has such a, I don't know, like a clownish look. I feel like
And they
I
also,
can't take
they
them
sound
seriously.
kind of clownish. They're just
Yeah.
silly and kind of wild, and they live in these tight family groups. It can be multi-generational groups. And so they're this little tiny woodpecker colony, and you find them in habitats where you also find oak trees because acorns are an important food source for them. So they collect acorns from the oaks and then they store them in usually a larger sort of spreading deciduous tree in what they call a woodpecker granary. They drill holes that are perfectly sized for acorns and they stuff them in there and they store all of these acorns up this length of trunk, and then they defend it from other birds. But in particular, I see them diving at squirrels regularly because the squirrels are like, this is easy. I'll just crawl up the trunk, pull an acorn out, easy breezy. But you've got woodpeckers flying at you from all corners. It's pretty comical to watch.
That sounds like a movie.
It's just so cool to see where they store them. So the first time I got to see one was at Davis Mountain State Park. And
cool.
There's some of the telephone poles they will use. And so it's
Sure.
crazy because you look at this pole and it's just got all these holes and they're stuffed with acorns. And it just looks so funny because they really are just the right size for the acorns to fit in too. So that's a fun one that we have here in Texas. But
Yeah.
part of the state that's really cool to get to see.
I think about like the pattern that we're talking about for folks to like envision it. It's like the back of like a Suriname toad, the toad that has its babies right out of its back.
Yes.
Or like the lotus flower, like kind of triggering for someone with trypophobia, like the fear of all those like well-organized holes together.
Yes.
It's exactly what it looks like, and except that some of them are stuffed with acorns.
That's funny. So those are some of kind of the fun different clues of woodpeckers. But can you talk about some of the ones that are like that we're gonna find in Texas, and some of the ones that might confuse people, like telling apart a hairy versus a downy woodpecker?
Sure. Yeah. So you've got a couple actually in Texas that sort of overlap.
Talk about all the confusing ones.
Okay. So let's see. Start with downy and hairy woodpeckers. In general, their plumage pattern is very similar. We could talk about the kind of mimicry that's happening. We think it's a form of mimicry. But downy woodpecker is like, the miniature hairy woodpecker. So plumage, about the same. Structurally, they're pretty different. Downy woodpecker has a tiny little beak with, to me, really prominent woodpeckers. A lot of woodpeckers have these plumes that sort of cover the nares, the opening on the bill, maybe so they don't get wood chips and things going inside their nostrils. On a downy woodpecker, because their bill is so tiny, these little feathery areas over the nares really are prominent. They're kind of puffy right at the base of the bill. Hairy woodpeckers have much longer bills. To me, as a result, those little nare plumes they're not as distinctive. They tend to be, downies are real compact. These compact little birds, short tails. Hairies, longer bodied. They look more stretched out. Their wings are a little longer. They actually have a tendency to move a little further. So that might be a reason for longer wings. So structural differences. And then if you look at the pattern of the outer tail feathers of downy versus hairy, get a really good look because it's hard to see. The outermost tail feathers of a downy woodpecker have little black splotches, whereas hairy has all white outer tail feathers. The color of the red on the rear crown also tends to be a little different. It's much brighter on a hairy woodpecker and a little deeper red on a downy, but subtle differences.
And that's one thing too that I'll point out, just as you were talking about the length of the bill. Sometimes I think, especially when you're not like you aren't usually going to have both of them next to each other, right? To compare. And so one thing that's good, I think, to remember is if somebody says, "Oh, it has an especially long bill," compare it to something else on the bird. So like a downy woodpecker, the length of its bill is, I don't know, like think about it compared to the width of its head, right? So that's a good trick that I learned. It's like thinking about the length of the bill compared to the width of the head. And on a downy, it's going to be like the same or shorter than the length of its head.
Yeah, shorter by a bit, probably.
Yeah, and so that's a point of reference, right? Is sometimes
Totally.
using the bird itself as a point of reference is helpful.
Yeah, completely agree.
I hate to throw a wrench in the conversation, but like always, we don't have a plan for Cup Chat, and somebody on Facebook just put out a great comment. So Miss Brandy had an idea for a Halloween costume, and I'm going to take it a step further and take it into a couple's Halloween costume.
Ooh.
Yes, I know,
I
right?
like where this is going.
Okay, so she goes, sounds like fun, a Halloween costume, a tree full of acorns. So one person could be the tree full of acorns, and then the other person could be the acorn woodpecker.
That's awesome.
That was a good one. Okay, so
Okay,
now
I thought you were going to go with male versus female woodpeckers, because that's another good thing to point out, is talking about how much difference we see in males versus females.
And we can do that.
And I thought we were going the downy hairy structural difference route. So we just have a whole Halloween party just woodpecker thing.
Stay tuned next year for our Halloween edition of Cup Chat, where we break out all of our bird costumes.
Hey, no, because there's some good ones out there. Because last year Halloween I was pregnant, and I had talked with Liz about how fun it would be to have like a whole family costume where like mom is a nest with an egg in it, and then you could have like a little one be like a baby bird, and then you've got mom and dad can each be the adults, and so many options. We have so many good ideas.
But you have just taken it from a couple's costume to a family costume ideas. Stay tuned. Next October, we will be giving you all of your Halloween birding ideas.
And one of us better learn to sew between now and then. Yes, you can't just go, Amazon a downy woodpecker costume. So
right, yeah, exactly.
Probably true. You can't Amazon a lot of
stuff. So Raymond, back on track. Male versus female. How much difference do we see in different species of woodpecker?
Well, some of them can be pretty subtle. You've got some species of woodpeckers like, let's say Lewis's woodpecker, for example, really not a lot of very obvious differences. Then you've got something like a downy woodpecker or a hairy woodpecker, where the main differences is just whether there's red on the rear crown in a male or a lack of red in a female. To some species, like take it back to the sapsuckers, for example, where you've got Williamson sapsucker, that the male looks so different from the female that when they were first collected and described, they were actually described as two distinct species.
Ooh, we should pull that one
Until-
up on our phones.
What's that?
We should pull that one up on our phones.
Yeah,
and
can you
show
show us
it.
a picture if you've got your guide open?
I got
That's
it
one
right
that
here.
I'm not familiar with.
Yeah, so they're sort of it's more of a Rocky Mountain species, Mountain West. They do make it into Texas on rare occasions. There was just one in South Texas last month.
You
So,
got lost.
so right here, okay, this is a male Williamson sapsucker. And below it, here is a female.
Oh yeah,
Oh,
those look
wow.
really different.
Very, very different. Structurally, yeah, they're the same, but plumage features are really quite different. They have
Well, and
they have
hold
sort of a
your
whitish
picture there,
rump.
right there. So if you hold
What-
your picture right there on that bottom picture, it really shows that tripod for everybody of how that female is really using her tail as a you called it a kickstand, but leverage
Mhm.
to get that leverage. And so that's a great illustration of that. And you can really see that triangular. I mean, I feel like it's science of birds standing on trees. My mother would be proud as the science teacher. So what is that? What is all the force and
Yeah,
Newton's law of
physics.
motion?
Physics,
Sorry,
that
Mom.
stuff.
I remember science class not that well though. My mom was actually my 8th grade science teacher. My first B ever. I'm gonna tell the world that one. 89.4.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, that's also though that made me think of one more thing kind of to talk about as we get close to 8 o'clock. But seeing those pictures with woodpeckers, we really see a lot of them in that black and white pattern. And so I think that's, that female is a lot more brown. We think about like flickers being really brown, but I think one thing that we sometimes think of, with different species of birds is looking at color. And with woodpeckers, you've got lots of them have some sort of red like ornamentation on them,
Yep.
but a lot of them have that black and white. And so you're not necessarily going to be like, oh, I saw, the woodpecker that has blue on it, because I don't think there are any of those. And so you're really going to, you've really got to pay attention to like the pattern of that black and white and thinking about, is it a big patch of white versus is it bars, or is it like where on the bird it's located? And so I think that's kind of another tip as you're identifying woodpeckers is you've got it down to a woodpecker, and then paying attention if they've got color that can help. But for a lot of them, it's going to be similar or the same. And so
Right.
you have to pay attention to the pattern of that color and not just the color itself.
Yeah.
Well, and
So
I
let
mean,
me
realize that all woodpeckers are really red, yellow, black, and white. I mean, like you don't get any
Yeah.
random
brown.
color either. Brown. I mean, like you don't get. I mean,
But yeah,
They
there's
don't
not like a
stray from
green or
that.
a blue or there's a
there are
fun
some
reason
pretty
for
fancy
that.
ones out of the United States, but you're right. In general, most of the woodpeckers across North America are pretty, uniform: black, whites, browns, yellows, oranges, reds, things like that.
But there's a fun reason for that. So we, like Raymond was talking about the kickstand tail like being stiff, and the pigments that cause those warm colors are structurally stronger than pigments that cause those cool colors. And so like the feathers and the whatever has that pigment is going to be stronger and stiffer when it's got those warm colors. So in a woodpecker, that makes sense.
Totally, yeah. That's
So-
like when you see some of the white birds, like a white ibis, for example, or a whooping crane, or a white pelican that's mostly white except for the dark wings or dark wing tips. It's thought that, but the melanin adds extra structure on these very important feathers that are utilized for flight. So this might be sort of useful. This is downy woodpecker versus bladderback woodpecker, which are similar in size. Both can be found in Texas. But as Maureen sort of mentioned, thinking about the distribution of where the black and the white is on the body is really helpful. So when I find a woodpecker, especially, okay, I've noted it's one that's like distinctly black and white. Look at the back. Are there nice sort of even bars across the back? Or is there a big patch of white sort of in the center of the back? That alone, making note of that back can break it down to, okay, I'm dealing with a hairy or a downy, or I'm dealing with ladder backed or maybe golden fronted. If I'm further east in Texas, maybe red bellied. And then also thinking about where the red is on the head. On a ladder backed, there's a lot of red on a male all the way across the crown, versus the downy, which is just, a little spot of red in the rear crown. And
He's got the whole, all the way across the top, full mohawk.
all the way across, all dark.
Yeah.
So yeah, in your field notebooks or however you keep track of things in the field for folks, that's one thing. If you see a woodpecker, write that down. What did the back look like? Where was there color in the head? If so, where was it distributed? And that can really quickly eliminate a whole bunch of species and make it a lot easier.
Cool.
Well, and that goes back to, and we talked about this when we gave our presentation at Making the Case for Bird ID a couple months ago, but really when you're starting out and you're out in your backyard and you're like, okay, I don't necessarily know what this one is. Sitting down with your field guide and really writing out or kind of charting the differences between two species you really could see and being prepared to go look, so almost doing a little bit of notes before you go.
Totally.
And talking about like, okay, so these two are the ones that I could see in my backyard. They're very similar. What are 3 things that are different about them? So when I go to my backyard, I can say, okay, this one has the red full mohawk, or this one has a red patch right here, or this one has a yellow front, really pointing out those key differences of woodpeckers in your own backyard. If you're having trouble identifying what's in front of you, and find your guide overwhelming. I don't like to go, I'm one of those people who doesn't like to see the bird outside and go, okay, let me come back and figure out which bird it is. That is overwhelming to me as a birder. It
Right.
takes, it's kind of like I use the example so much of, it's like using a dictionary in grade school. Well, just use a dictionary. Your teacher would say, well, if I don't know how to spell the word, I can't use the dictionary, lady. And that's sometimes how I feel in my guide. If I don't even know where to start, sometimes I can be overwhelming. So now woodpeckers, it's a very short condensed section, but especially if you're targeting 2 or 3 in your area, writing out those key differences can give you a leg up on just being more automatic in your ID when you go out versus having to come back and flip through the pages. So
Right.
that's my few tips.
Yeah.
But it's been a wonderful Wednesday morning. We are drawing up a little bit after 8.
I know we are, but I have a question for Raymond, because I have to ask a fun question, especially because he has a shirt with affiliated woodpecker on it. Is that your favorite woodpecker, or what's your favorite woodpecker?
Oh, good question. Being from the desert Southwest, I have to say I don't get to see pileated as much as I would like to. I do enjoy them a lot. Favorite woodpecker is probably gotta go with the acorn. I think they're just, I could sit there and watch acorn woodpeckers for days and just be entertained. And yeah.
So you might actually take Brandy's suggestion up on the Halloween costume idea.
I think it's a grand idea.
So.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like
well, everyone,
I'll tune in with it on Halloween. Show you what it looks like.
I would appreciate that. We would love it. So everybody, it's been a wonderful Wednesday morning. Raymond, thank you so much for joining us. It's been wonderful to talk about woodpeckers with you and kind of really break down that ID process. And I think giving our listeners the tools of how to start that ID and how do we kind of target, really, is it a woodpecker or is it not a woodpecker?
Right.
So I loved that this morning, and then diving in a little bit deeper has been super fun. So, and your shirt's amazing and your cup's amazing, which we haven't even talked about because
wait, what's that?
I had to bring a cup.
Bring a cup.
Oh, yes. That's wonderful.
Isn't that awesome? It's my favorite.
And I
cup.
love how it's not just printed on there, right? Like it looks like it's.
Oh yeah, no, like the artist actually sort of etched it out, like carved out the design.
That's so cool.
Harlequin duck.
This kind of gives me inspiration. Raymond, you may have inspired a new giveaway. We may have to figure out how to do we want to see your cup chat cup. And
Oh,
see everyone
Ooh, I
at
like
home cup chat cups, because we haven't, we see all of our guests.
yeah.
Right now, I've been very lame using my to-go cup. You don't have a cup today, I'm sure. Oh, you do? What is it?
I grabbed my TWS, my 2019 Reno TWS Tervis for traveling.
Oh, it's up.
So
Nice.
It's got a sheep on it.
it's got a bighorn sheep and a fish.
Oh, now
so
I'm seeing it.
we're lacking in the bird category, but we've got the wildlife
I got
going on.
you. I got you in the bird category. We got mammals and birds covered here.
We got everybody covered. And yeah, it was TWS and American Fisheries Society had a joint conference in Reno, so we had to incorporate the fish.
I thought I was seeing a fish fly through the sky there for a second.
Yep, fish flying
Before
through
I
the
saw
sky.
the ram.
Yeah, I think there's kind of like a yin yang thing going on. Yeah. Mhm.
So anyway, so Raymond, yes, you're definitely in the running for the best all-time cup on Cup Chat for sure. Gorgeous cup, and we'll have to have you back. It's been
Thanks.
fun.
I would love that.
We try to do a lot of different fun Cup Chats. If you haven't watched any before, oh, you've got some love on Facebook. So Bill says hello, FYI.
Hi, Bill.
And then Stephanie, do you remember Miss Stephanie Lopez? She goes, I recently met Raymond at the Rio Grande Birding Festival. Hey, y'all. So Stephanie's one of our best in our Birding with Extension family, and love her. So I do want an invite next time, Stephanie, to the Tortoise's birthday party. I'm not sure how you missed me on the invite list, but that looks fun at the National Butterfly Center on Facebook. So
yeah.
she made it like a turtle watermelon thing. I mean, she was creative.
Oh,
so.
I missed this. Okay.
Yeah. So anyways, that's what you'll get for not being Facebook. I'm just kidding.
Great.
So anyways, thank you, Raymond, for joining us.
Thank you both.
Everyone for
Yes,
joining us
a lot
this
of fun.
morning, and we hope you have a great week. Thanks for joining. Next week, we will.
Next week is our year in review because it's our last one for the year.
Yes. Yes, that's true. And we will start our top 10 cup chats of the year. So the ones that y'all watched the most for 2021, we will start that on Monday. So
Nice.
no, right?
Yeah.
Yes, I think so. I'm not sure.
I think so. We're going to do some math because we struggle with that sometimes. And then we will start them when it is 10 days from the end of the year.
Yeah. So anyways, thank you everybody for joining us.
Awesome.
Thank you, Raymond. Thank you, Bill, for the suggestion.
Thank you all.
We were glad to meet have a new member of the Birding with Extension family. Y'all have a great Wednesday.
Bye, y'all.